Happy Hanukkah, everyone. I'd like to dedicate the class to Malka Bat Chana, the Yartzeit, grandmother of a very dear friend of ours, David, and which are most appropriate to begin the class, which is titled The Light in the Dark, to actually begin with actually performing the mitzvah, since this is the last night of Hanukkah, we light all the 8 flames. That will actually begin with lighting the menorah, and then we'll talk about it a bit. But I'll begin by lighting it. I'll do the blessings and share with you a song or two, Hanukkah song or two. And so, with your permission, we'll do that right now. Okay? Let's go. So please, everybody, rise. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner Hanukkah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asa nisim l'avoseinu b'yamim ha'em b'zman hazeh. No? Okay. Let me just start. If you know this song, sing along, please. Masur Yeshua si lechana l'shabeach ticham v'estefilasim v'shamta d'mizabeach leistachin bach meir hamabeach azegmur b'shim ezmur Chanukah sameach azegmur b'shim ezmur Chanukah sameach. With your permission, we could all sit down now. Let me just get this back here. I'd like to share with you a song I've sung many times here on Hanukkah. A song I grew up with, Ananer Salalu. And it is a beautiful song. It was composed by the Chassidim of the 5th Chabad Rebbe, who would make rare appearances. And one of the times he would appear was be Hanukkah. So, because they so much enjoyed being in his presence, they composed a relatively longer song than usual, so they should be able to keep him out there longer to be able to spend more time with him. So the song is Haner Salalu. I shall sing it. Again, David, welcome. I just dedicated the class to Malka Bat Chana, your dear grandmother. So in her honor, a soul is compared to a flame, as we shall soon discuss. So it's very appropriate. As we light flames, we light souls, and souls continue their journey wherever they are. And they're with us. Though we don't see them, they see us. Let's put it that way. So I'm going to sing this Haner Salalu. Here's the nigga. nanai dilioi dililoi 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 hanerois halalu hanerois halalu hanerois halalu halalu hanerois halalu anu madlikin al hatruis diridam diridaya bam 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 diridam diridam diridaya na 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 hanerois halalu diridam diridam diridaya na 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 diridam diridaya diridaya na na anu madlikin al hatruis real Hanisim v'al hanif lois she'osi sola v'sehenu she'osi sola v'sehenu bayomim bizman hazeh bayomim bizman hazeh bizman hazeh al yedei kayanecha hagdashim 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 yarararai 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 yanum yarararai 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 yanum yarararai 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 narai nano v'chol shmei nasimei Chanukah neiras alalu kaideshem v'chol shmei nasimei Chanukah neiras alalu kaideshem v'chol shmei nasimei Chanukah neiras alalu kaideshem 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 Yein lanu reshus lishtamesh bahen lishtamesh bahen lishtamesh bahen v'chol shmei nasimei Chanukah neiras alalu kaideshem v'chol shmei nasimei Chanukah neiras alalu kaideshem v'yein lanu reshus lishtamesh bahen elo L'reisan bilvad, bilvad Kedei leidei sulahalel, leidei sulahalel L'shimcho hagodoi, leidei sulahalel Leidei sulahalel, l'shimcho hagodoi Ahal nisecha v'yahal nifleisecha v'yahal Yeshuaisecha Ahal nisecha v'yahal nifleisecha v'yahal Yeshuaisecha Ahal nisecha v'yahal nifleisecha v'yahal Yeshuaisecha Al nisecha v'yahal nifleisecha v'yahal Yeshuaisecha. Happy Hanukkah. Happy Hanukkah, everyone. Again, we dedicated to Malka Bas Chana, David's grandmother. And the topic we shall discuss is fitting the flames that are burning right beside me here. is the light in the dark. The light in the dark. Light within the dark. Okay. Nachmanides, the Ramban, a middle-aged great scholar, writes something fascinating in the chapter in the book of Numbers where it talks about the lighting of the menorah in the Beis Hamikdash in the temple. As you know, every day they lit the menorah in the temple for hundreds of years until the temple was destroyed. As a matter of fact, Hanukkah is the commemoration of the rededication of the menorah and the temple and the altar after it was desecrated, as I discussed last week's class at length. The discovery of the cruse of oil, the little a crucible of oil, and that burned for 8 days. But the menorah in the temple only had 7 actual branches. And the Ramban writes, by Nachmanides writes this fascinating statement. He says that the temple's menorah ultimately was extinguished, even though the Torah calls it ner tamid, which means an eternal flame, and it was meant to always burn. But bottom line is the end, it was extinguished. And he says, Haneres Halalu, however, as I just sang, Haneres Halalu, these flames of Hanukkah, Einam B'Teil Me'elam, they never were extinguished. Because even after the temple was destroyed, Jews continued to light the menorah in thick and thin through the most difficult times. Today, we thank God we're blessed in freedom, so it's not a challenge. But there were times you can imagine lighting menorah was not easy. Whether it was during the Holocaust or in earlier times, and yet they maintained these flames through the generations. So it's pretty awesome to be able to sit here, celebrate Hanukkah, and know that there's a flame that never was extinguished. Every year came Hanukkah, no matter how difficult it was, the Jews found a way. I used to hear from my father stories how in Russia they didn't have candles, and they didn't have any wicks. What they would do is they would actually take potato peels and find some oil, either oil from they didn't always have olive oil, other oil, and find some way to light the menorah. So it's fascinating to hear, something that travels like a time traveler through history, and is here with us today, just as it was all those years of our ancestors, our parents and grandparents. So besides the fact that the powerful element of continuity and the Jewish eternal continuity, Am Yisrael Chai, a nation that has survived despite all the obituaries and the challenges we faced, but we also come with lit menorahs, with lit candles and flames, which in itself is something worthy of celebrating and honoring, just for no other reason, just simply something that has survived so long. Who wants to be responsible to be the one that extinguishes a flame that the Ramban says was never extinguished? That's a pretty awesome responsibility, also a great gift. But we all know that even though it's attributed to Newton, Isaac Newton, the truth is it's already written in books earlier, Jewish books, that we are midgets that stand on the shoulders of giants. And a midget is maybe shorter than a giant, but when you stand on the shoulder of a giant, you see farther than the giant does, because we come with a cumulative power of generations past, and that has a tremendous amount of gift and honor to have that, because we all go through challenges in life. Nobody is immune from the pains and suffering. But when you know that with you standing generations, and you can stand on their shoulders, and you have someone to lean on, and you have foundations that are solid, that have withstood any challenge, it's a very empowering thing to know that. Because even if we don't always feel confident, just knowing that you have a team, so to speak, behind you, you have generations of people who made it, and the proof is in the pudding. The fact is, we're here celebrating Hanukkah, menorahs lit throughout the city, throughout the country, throughout the world, public menorahs. I remember being in Berlin Hanukkah one year. It blew me away. In the middle of the square, that what was it called? The Brandenburg Gate, whatever it's called there. That big square you always see in the images with Hitler, with his literally hundreds of thousands of legions. Massive square in Berlin, where Hitler was massing against the Jews. So now you have a menorah standing there lit on Hanukkah. And when I asked the rabbi, why is the menorah in the center and the Christmas tree on the right, moved off to the side, he says, well, it used to be in the center. He convinced the guy that it's nicer for the aesthetics that the menorah should be in the center. So you see that after what we went through in Germany, in the center of it all, in Berlin, you see a menorah lit. So you ask, who withstood whom, who survived and who did not. So despite our losses and despite our wounds and despite we may be limping, but we're here. We're standing strong. And as every Holocaust survivor says, my vengeance, our vengeance. He opens up a photo album and shows you his children, his grandchildren, great-grandchildren. That's how we celebrate. Not through reciprocity, not through reciprocating pain with pain, but by building. And by lighting a flame. That's always been the custom by Jews. We light flames. As a matter of fact, a number of years ago, someone in this class came and shared with me a beautiful story. She was at a birthday party. A little girl, a 5-6-year-old girl, it was her birthday, so they brought out a cake with 5 candles. And as the custom of the land is, blow out the candles. And the girl refused. They said, blow out the candles, that's what we do. She says, no, we don't blow out candles, we light candles. Which was interesting. So I suggested a custom, I don't know if it's caught on yet in the United States. But a candle is a symbol of light. It's a symbol of life. It's a symbol, as I mentioned, of the soul. Why would you want to blow out a soul? Why would you want to blow out life? What they should do is bring a birthday cake with unlit candles and let the birthday child light the candles. I know it may be just symbolic, but it's a message. Everything is a message to children. Everything is a message. You blow out, it's a sign of why would you blow it out? So lighting the candle seems so much more appropriate. So just a suggestion, maybe pass it on, maybe it could go viral, this idea. Same candles, no difference, the same cost, same price, same cake, everything's the same. You light them instead of blowing them out. As a matter of fact, there's some that have a custom not actually to blow out a candle even after it's finished burning. They won't blow it out. They'll tap it, or they'll put the cover it. Because a flame, Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam is the expression in the book of Proverbs. The soul of a human being is the flame of God. The closest thing in this physical world that approximates our soul, no one has ever seen a soul, is a flame. And the properties of a flame and properties of light, and you can study them, really teach us about the properties of our own selves. So that's a pretty amazing thing, which is also an interesting, the expression of one of the Rabbis is that we have to listen to what the flames tell us. The story the flames tell us. He said in Yiddish, so it was a licht. We should listen to what the flames tell us. Now you can say flames don't speak, they don't tell us stories, but it's not correct. Everything tells a story. Nature tells us stories, beauty tells us stories, a flower tells a story. It just speaks in a different language. So when we observe a flame, when you look at a flame, you see a few things that stand out. Number one is, most obvious of all, it's the only physical thing that defies gravity. Many things defy gravity, gas, helium, and so on, but you don't see helium unless you put it into a balloon. A flame is the only thing with the physical eye actually defies gravity. It rises. And were it not for the wick, it would expire, it would just disappear. So you literally see a certain personality type, which teaches us that the soul is exactly the same. Everything in this world falls. Everything descends. Everything is affected by the gravitational pull, physically and metaphorically. We're all affected by peer pressure, by different influences and attitudes of people that have expectations of us that we want to satisfy or please. But the soul is the only force inside of you, which is your primary force, that is transcendent in nature. As opposed to being drawn down, it's always rising. It's aspiring. It dreams. It imagines. It looks upward. And to capture one of the stories that Tzemach Tzedek, one of the Rebbes, tells the story when he was a little child. He was once playing on a ladder with other children. And all the other children were afraid to climb to the top. He climbed all the way to the top. Later his grandfather, the great Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman, the founder of Chabad, the author of the Tanya, Shulchan Aruch, asked him, his name was Menachem Mendel, he asked him, tell me, why is it that all the other children were afraid to climb to the top and you're the only one that climbed? And he answered very simply. He said, Zaydit, which is in Yiddish, grandpa. He said, very simple. When they were climbing, they kept looking down. They saw how high they were. They were afraid to climb higher. They looked down. They saw, wow, very high up. I was climbing. I kept looking up. So I saw how low I was, and it motivated me to climb higher. Simple little story. You can imagine this little boy became a great man. But it's a fascinating answer. We all have those two options. You hang around with people that are less accomplished than you. You look down. It usually doesn't motivate you to accomplish much, because you say to yourself, hey, look how much I've done compared to them. You hang around people that have accomplished more than you, there's a certain element of jealousy and a certain element of competitiveness that motivates you and say, I want to accomplish more. So we all have these two choices, to look up or to look down. And looking up means is always a healthy element of angst that a human being should have. Not anxiety, we're not talking about too extreme. But an angst, a certain restlessness is healthy for a human being. Not extreme, but a certain amount of restlessness to feel not totally content and satisfied. Which usually leads to lethargy and leads to apathy and leads to comfort zones are not the great motivator catalyst for growth. A little pressure, a little challenge. And you see, when do we excel? When do we shine? When we are pressed, when we are pressured. As a writer, I can tell you, if there were no deadlines and so on, I'd still be busy writing my first article, perfecting it. These things that you hate most are the things that make you excel best because they force you to produce. Which, by the way, the olive oil that we use, which is the preferable fuel used for a menorah, you can use a candle and so on, but olive oil is the Torah's expression. How olives produce oil? Through pressing olives. So there's a Talmudic expression that says, an olive will not produce oil until you press it. The pressure is what brings the greatest. Now, we call about precious stones, gems, diamonds. These are all due to serious pressure that have created such beauty. Pressure is always what creates beauty. Without that, you may have something good, but you won't have excellence. Pearls, natural pearls. Natural pearls are produced. They are the secretion of an oyster, of an irritated oyster. How do you like that? I don't know if it's a good marketing tool for the pearl industry, an irritated oyster, but basically an oyster has very, very sensitive skin, sensitive inner belly, and when a piece of dust ends up in there, it's very irritating. Like think of a piece of dust on your eyeball. So in our case, the tears wash it away. It's very irritating, it's very sensitive area. So what does the oyster do? The oyster secretes a certain liquid, that's whitish, and as it hardens, it's a pearl. So every pearl really was born through a piece of dust. How do you like that? And most perfumes, if you know where they came from, you wouldn't want to wear it. Perfumes are, especially the most powerful perfumes, come from toxin smells of skunk and other animals, that when they remove, the bad smells leaves a very powerful musk or other type of... check it out. I mean, today I'm sure they could create it with synthetics, but I'm talking about the natural perfumes, the natural incense, and so on. So beauty and greatness is achieved through pressure. It's always the case. Now, too much pressure can also be overwhelming. That's why you need to have a balance and angst, and that's what the flame is about. The flame is always rising. That's how a human being by nature is. Look at children. What are children like until they learn to become couch potatoes? When we impose upon them we freeze them. Children are always moving. It's a sign of life is movement. Life and movement are synonymous. Everything alive is always moving. Look at children. They don't rest. Put a television in front of their face or a video, and suddenly they freeze. Kiss of death. But beyond that, children are always on the move. They're always mobile. They're always running about. They're always moving about. I mentioned the cardiologist that comes often to this class. So once he was complaining to me, he says to me, my life is very difficult. I wish I just have some calm and rest. Emotionally, psychologically, he was going through a lot of difficulties in his life. And he wants to have some bliss, as he put it. So I smiled and I said to him, you mean like a flat line? So he said, no, not what I meant. As a cardiologist, he understood a flat line is not exactly what you want a heartbeat to look like. A heartbeat is a wave. Dips and valleys. Not too extreme. That's how life is supposed to be. Life is movement. It's a rhythm. It's a pulse. That's life. We are the only creatures on earth that have mastered the art of, as I said, becoming couch potato, just being immobile. And some of us consider it to be like a virtue. I could just sit on the couch and watch football for 3 hours, and let the action. You live vicariously through the action that you're watching, and you think you're part of the action. So bottom line is that's the first lesson of a flame. Another thing you see about a flame is the element of that a little light dispels a lot of darkness, as opposed to, for example, the natural properties of fire and water, where they both oppose each other. If enough fire can evaporate the largest bodies of water, and enough water can extinguish the greatest fires. They are two adversarial forces. And it just depends who's going to win by volume. Light and darkness don't work that way. You put light and darkness near each other, what happens? There's no war. There's no battle. Darkness is not a match for light. As soon as you put a little light, automatically that area will be illuminated, and the darkness just moves away. It always defers to light, naturally, without effort. Now, obviously, if it's a very large, dark place, you need a lot more light, which is a lesson in life that ignorance is really only the absence of intelligence. Like darkness is the absence of light. And most power, the power that we face often in life, the difficulties, the demons, the fears, all the other forces that cause us to feel insecure, can be just plain ignorance. It's like you think the darkness has power, but if you bring a little light there, the darkness suddenly disappears. And I've seen this many, many times in life, especially psychologically. It's like a psychological enemy. When you think you're weak, you become weak. Doesn't mean you are. Now, psychological warfare has nothing to do with how much you have, it's how much you think you have, or how much the other person makes you feel you don't have. Like the ultimate poker game. It's not playing the cards, it's playing the person. And in the case like, I've tried to share this story. I remember when we were in summer camp. So I was in a bunk with a guy that thought he was a chess master. He actually was an excellent chess player, but he was also very arrogant about it. So I decided to put him in his place, because he was a brilliant chess player, but he wasn't very common sense. He didn't have much. So I psyched him up and thinking that I'm the best chess player that exists on this side of the earth. I just said to him, you don't even know how to play. I really like. So he said, you know what? Why don't we play each other? So I said, listen, I'll beat you within a few moves. It's not even. I won't even insult myself for playing you. Anyway, but he was like immature, so he kept on insisting. So of course we sat down to play. And frankly, I wasn't close to how well he played. To be very honest, I can play decently, but not no master. But he thought I was so good because I psyched him to thinking that every move I made, how stupid it may be, he thought it was some brilliant move. So literally he lost within 15 moves because I made some move that I had no reason why I made it. I just made it. And he was sitting, I remember, for 15 minutes thinking, what did I mean with that move? And because of that, he outthought himself and he made such ridiculous moves. And I basically was just made. It was made in around 15, 16 moves. Later I let him know that I don't play that well. It's just, but that's what you can do. You come in a good negotiator, you have nothing in your hand. You could have literally nothing. Another person thinks you have something. They have no idea. So how much of this spills over into our psychological battles? Our confidence, our lack of confidence, what we project, projection. So I'm not suggesting we have to bluff it, but do you really know what kind of potential you have? Do you even know? If growing up, unfortunately, let's say in a dysfunctional family where parents berated a child, unfortunately, it's more common than not in our times. Just this week, speaking to someone, literally, you could see in the body language, a father that continuously, in his own insecurity, was also a psychologist. It was the worst, an insecure father, psychiatrist or psychologist, because then he uses psychology, so to speak, to diminish everyone around him in order to protect his own childish insecurity. And he literally could destroy a child, destroy a child's confidence by constantly knocking them. So you grow up and you think you're damaged goods, you think you're worthless, because you were told as a child you're worthless. But it has nothing to do with reality necessarily. It's to do with what you were told, and you just bought into it. So I'm not blaming anyone, because obviously a child is defenseless, impressionable, and what you hear is what you believe, especially coming from people that are supposed to love you. But you just see from there, a person's whole life can change dramatically in how he or she deals with relationships, trust, and so on, simply because they're convinced that they don't have power. That's a perfect example where darkness is just absence of light. You shine the light, it would all disappear. I'm not suggesting it's easy after a person has developed a habit or attitude like that. So even if it's projected an illusion, but an illusion that starts growing on you becomes almost as real as reality. They say, nurture can be as powerful as nature. Once you've convinced yourself that you have no confidence or a low self-esteem or have no strengths or you're weak, it's almost as difficult as if you actually were. But it's a big difference because it's not necessarily a force to contend with. It's more of a psychological attitude. So lesson number 2 from the flames of Hanukkah is to look at ourselves and say, how many of our fears and insecurities are simply absence of light, not real objective forces, not real demons, not real nightmares, just a boogeyman in your mind that you have created. Because even suggesting that is already weakens the enemy. Because then maybe the enemy isn't that powerful. Maybe it's only feeding off your ignorance or your weak attitude or your lack of confidence and stuff like that. Which is why you see confident people, you think they always know that they can prevail? No, but they have an attitude that they're always confident in their navigational skills. A good swimmer doesn't mean he can always swim in any situation. He knows when to swim, knows when to stop, knows when to, when a storm strikes, when to not fight the waves, knows when to float, knows when to move forward. It's a navigational tool. It's like confidence, knowing that you can handle it. It doesn't mean that you won't be struck. And you see, this is the key to anything in life. You see trees that are very powerful. A ship. When do you see their power? During a storm. During a storm, the trees that have the deep roots, strong foundations, same with the ship, will outlast the storm. And those that don't will fall. When things are calm, you can't really tell. You can't tell who has the strongest underpinnings and foundations, because everything looks good on the outside. And the key is to how to fortify that, so you don't have to wait for a storm to find out. Who was it that said? I know they attribute it to Eleanor Roosevelt, but you could say it about the Jewish people. She said, a woman is like a tea bag. You don't know how strong she is until you put her into hot water. You know, men. This is I added this half. Men, when you put them in hot water, they yell, "It's hot." You know, I don't mean to be sexist, but it's often true. This statement. And bottom line is that the second lesson is that most of our fears and our darkness is really our own minds, and we don't have a clue of the real potential we have, which is why it's such a blessing gift when you meet a mentor that believes in you, and not just pays lip service. I'm talking about someone that truly believes in you and pushes you, and to have a friend that can kick you in the butt and tell you to get out of this attitude is a great blessing. So lesson number 2 is find yourself a friend like that, because that's the people who will help you excel. I'm not talking about someone who's looking to criticize, looking to just we're talking about somebody who is constructive and really cares about you, that you can trust, but will not just patronize you as well, but will challenge you and say, you can do a lot better. Obviously, we also need reinforcement and so on. So that's lesson number 2. Lesson number 3, every night we light another flame in Hanukkah. The lesson of Mailam B'Kodesh. You have to always grow. If you did one good thing one day, the next day it should be 2, the next day 3. There's no such thing as just staying stable. Just like a flame rises, the same thing, it rises every day with more. And there are many other lessons we can talk about the Hanukkah flames. But I want to focus on the dark and light element. The darkness and light and dark have been a recurrent theme, one of the most popular themes in literature, in song, in poetry, in philosophy, light and dark. And today, even in science, not just today, the truth is, because lightness and darkness are a part of our lives. The simplest form of it is that the sun rises in the morning, the dawn breaks, light, the sun sets, and the darkness descends. How much has been written about darkness and light? Entire books. And about the poetry, the beauty of it. Some talk about the darkness of it. So many elements of it. Now it all begins, if you think about it, from the Bible. You open up a Torah right in the beginning. What does it say? God created heaven and earth. And then it says the entire earth was covered in darkness. And the divine spirit hovered over the waters. Very cryptic terms. And then it says, and God said, let there be light. And there was light. So light and dark is literally the beginning of the entire Torah. Many read these passages, these verses, and almost dismissively, like, okay. It's not so. If you really think about it, these verses have a lot of lessons in them. And the more fascinating is, even some of the most sophisticated ideas in physics, in modern physics, about light, discovered just in the last century. Einstein, next year will be 100 years from his theory of relativity, and other discoveries about light are transformed the world. The way we understand light today is the reason we have technology. Because light is not just light is energy. And energy is what powers how much of our lives. The ability to manipulate energy, the ability to understand its properties, is key to building any form of technology. So we're not talking about some abstract concept. We're talking about something that affects us daily. We may not know the back end, so to speak, what makes things tick, but it's all about the understanding of light and dark that defines most of science today. Lately, in the last, they say the biggest discovery in the last decade was the discovery that 90 or more % of existence is filled with dark energy. So dark matter, they call it, or dark energy. It's interesting. No one ever thought of that way. They would think that light was the most dominant thing, dark. And of course, you've heard of black holes. This constantly pops up in the news and pops up in scientific revelations and so on. So these ideas in physics, modern physics, and the ideas as well in other schools of thought, like I said, the poetry and the romance and you name it, dark and light, fill our literature, fill our scholarship. One area that has not really been adequately developed, and I'm sure it will be in time, will be the psychological take on light and dark. In physics, the concept of a black hole, today pretty basic. Once upon a time, when it was first discovered and first predicted, it was seen as crazy, bizarre. Many scientists thought of it as completely ridiculous. They thought of it as insanity. But today it's been proven time and again. Einstein predicted it. There were scientists before him that predicted it, and then there was observations that confirmed what's a black hole. A black hole is this phenomenon where the gravitational pull of a particular body is so intense it doesn't even allow light to escape. I mentioned gravitational pull before, so we know gravity exerts power. You see it every time. The classic Newton-Apple story, whether it's true or not, or urban legend. The bottom line, you throw something up, it will fall. This is what they call the power of gravity. That the body, the Earth, has a power of gravity. The Moon has another power of gravity, and when we saw the men land on the Moon, you saw they were bouncing about because the gravity is less. In certain places in outer space, there's zero gravity. And if you don't have grounding, if you don't have anything to hold you on, you'll be lost in space. And there's different planets, based on their density and based on other atmospheric conditions, have different gravitational pulls. Einstein proved that different gravitational pulls affect also the way time moves. Time moves slower when there's a stronger gravitational pull. And that's why someone that can be 5 years old, if they were living in there, they would be 6 years old. I know it sounds ridiculous, but this is real science. The relativity theory of time and so on. So bottom line is that gravity affects. Now what happens if the gravitational pull is so intense that it doesn't just hold down tables and chairs and people, but even light itself? You see, the sun emits light. That means the gravity of the sun is not that powerful to not allow the light to escape, or else we wouldn't be here. So we see the sunlight, its warmth reaches us, its light reaches us, and many of its rays reach us. What happens if there's an entity that's so powerful it doesn't let anything escape? That's what's called a black hole. Now the gravitational pull is so powerful, it sucks everything in. And how do they know that it exists if it's so powerful and you can't see it? Because you see its impact on its surroundings. You see other bodies behaving in weird ways, you know there must be something there, almost like a magnetic force. So you don't see the magnet, but you see its impact. And you see, when you study it long enough and you study patterns, you realize, you don't have to see that right here is a black hole. If you see everything around it is behaving bizarrely and being drawn to something, even though you don't see the something, it's clear that it's having an impact. So this concept is, as I said, relatively new, 100 years old, even though there's been predictions, but the understanding of it is far deeper today, and this is a part of the most fascinating new frontiers of science, the discovery of dark matter out there, where they say that most of existence today is dark matter. Such matter. Dark matter. Not necessarily black holes, but things that do where there's no light. Now, why am I mentioning it all, elaborating? Because the parallel to psychology, as I said, modern psychology has not yet really addressed it. You don't find anywhere talking about, let's say, the psychological black hole. But Kabbalah and Hasidic thought that go back thousands of years, starting from the Zohar, talk about darkness in the context of the human being. And cite the verses that I mentioned before from the Bible, from the Torah, that talk about the dark and light in the beginning, and then God said, let there be light. What kind of darkness was there? So there's an interesting expression that says that the darkness, before God said, let there be light, darkness and light, it says, were mishtamshim ba'arvuvia. In Hebrew, translated, it means they were serving mixed together in a confused mix. Think of it like a snowball effect, where dark and light is mixed together. So people say, what does that mean, dark and light mixed together? Either it's light or it's dark. I mentioned before, a little light dispels darkness. How could light and dark be part of one thing? They could maybe be not far from each other. Let's say you see, sometimes you bring a little flame into a room, so you can see the flame is illuminating, and right near, not far from it, you see darkness. But how could you say that they're one? So physically, we may not have an example for it, even though I'm sure in science they probably can simulate or discover or identify such a state where light and dark meet. But psychologically, we absolutely have it. We have it every day, every second of our lives. There are things that you may have a strength, that while it's a strength, it's also a weakness. Many of our light inside of our spirits is also our darkness. Like the Talmud says, the greater a person, the greater their temptations, their challenges. Who are the people who have caused the most damage in history? The people with the greatest skills. So we have in our own beings, constantly, let's put it this way, your mind is a powerful tool. Is your mind light or dark? The answer depends what you use it for. And you could have that same mind being used both ways at the same time. You can be using it for something positive, and a second later you can be using your ingenuity to hurt somebody. In the human being, light and dark come completely together. That's why it's so complicated. That's why in therapy it's so complicated to make any heads and tails of a person's situation, because everything is entangled. I mentioned before, just to use extreme example of abusive situation. When a person that loves you hurts you, God forbid, why is it so painful? Why is it so difficult? Because if there was a stranger you don't expect more. But if it's a parent or someone that's supposed to love you, and at the same time while they're giving you love, they also hurt you, that is light and dark all like a one big snowball. And that's where the problems are. It would be far easier if we knew this is the enemy and here's my friend. What happens? The problem is if you don't know if it's your enemy or your friend, or your friend is also your enemy. And this is one of the biggest challenges psychologically in our lives. To know. Look at relationships. People fall in love with each other. They trust each other. 2 years later, they're in court ready to kill each other. What happened? Were they delusional? Not necessarily. Is because emotions and feelings and attitudes are a big jumble, a mess. Think of the last time you fell in love. Think of the last time you were really connected or attached to somebody. It's not so black and white. It's not like perfect. Oh, I love someone, everything is great. It's not correct. It comes with it, you become vulnerable, and you realize the other person has qualities, and they may also have some things that are not such great qualities. The problem is the emotions that you have are all a big jumble. A big jumble. I like this person, there's some things I don't like, and you can't distinguish what is it I like. Sometimes you even discover that the thing you like is actually the thing you dislike at the same time. Now, if that person channeled that part of themselves, that would be great, but if they don't channel it, you really hate them for that. This is a very common experience, where the same thing you like about them, when misused or used the wrong way, you don't like about them. And then you have to make a decision. Do you want to extract that part? It's almost like, God forbid, I don't want to compare it, but let's say talk about cancer. So what happens with cancer? The toxins begin to eat at healthy cells, and the healthy cells and the bad cells and the malignant cells, you can't distinguish between them. That's why chemotherapy or other interventions, you have to kill the healthy with the good, with the bad, because they're all intertwined. That's one of the curses of cancer. It's not a disease or illness you can just isolate. It becomes so embedded that the healthy is now part of it. It's like you can't get to the unhealthy if you don't get through the healthy. It's all big mix-up. Churchill said famously that during the time of war, the truth is so precious, you have to surround it with an army of lies. You understand? Decoy, deception. Why do you need deception? Because you can't let them know where your strengths and weaknesses are. So this is called the state of confusion. And I'm sure everyone has had an experience of confusion in your lives. Would you think so? Right? Confusion. What should I do? Should I take this job? Should I not? Should I live here? Should I marry this person? Should I not? I mean, the list goes on. And what is confusion essentially? Confusion means that it's not black and white. Exactly. It's all mixed together. The black and white are mixed together. It's gray. This is called light and dark all jumbled together. So the Kabbalists and the Hasidic masters talk about this in very fascinating ways. They say there's a state where darkness and light are very clearly delineated. This is dark and this is light. This is good and this is not good. But then there comes a state, especially in our universe, where these two get mixed together. And when they get mixed together, this is where it becomes increasingly difficult to figure out what's what. And sometimes we will even reject the light because it's just coming with too much darkness at the same time, which is like throwing out the baby with the bathwater. And you see this very often. I was just recently counseling someone who asked me about, they were dating this woman, and she was a very powerful person. And it's very attractive to be around a person who has a lot of strength and a lot of power. But at the same time, power also can suck you in and can destroy you if you're not strong enough. And he had this love-hate relationship. They didn't know what to do. On one hand, extremely drawn to her strengths, but at the same time, she was she would literally drained him. Now, even that is not so simple to analyze. The question is it partially him? Is he too weak? Is he unable to handle it? And is he attracted to the right things? You can analyze this it's case by case. But like I vividly saw, right there you saw strength and weakness, or darkness and light right in the same person. In this case, he was unable to handle it, so I basically told him he should just stay away. But she did, because it was destroying him. It wasn't just simply not possible. It had nothing to do with the woman. She may be a very fine woman. I met her a few times, but he was just simply he was getting completely a wreck. But the point I'm making here is that this is part of the biggest challenges in life, is when things are such a jumbled mess. So comes God and says in the Bible, let there be light. It's not just a statement, let there be light. It's basically giving us a blessing and a gift that even in a state where things are confused, you can find the source of light, clarity. Clarity. Let there be light. This is light. And it helps clarify the confusion that we may have. Hanukkah is a celebration of let there be light. That's why we celebrate. We light the candles. The question is, what does that teach us about? How does one get through this confusion? How does one deal with this whole thing? So there's a few really fascinating elements. And as I said, this is rooted that I'm discussing now long before any science wrote about this. That's why it's so powerful. Because when I first started studying physics and reading this matter, I couldn't believe the parallels, especially in the Kabbalistic works that talk about the dimension of light. In the Zohar, there's a statement right in the beginning of the Zohar called the lamp of darkness. The lamp of darkness, interesting statement. You usually don't define lamp, you say a lamp that gives off light. What kind of a lamp of darkness? And this remained a cryptic statement for many, many years, for a millennia or more. Until the Arizal, the great mystic in the 16th century, who lived in Sfat, Rabbi Isaac Luria is his name, and he deciphered what meant the lamp of darkness, and he described the concept called the big tzimtzum. I've just talked about this at the class at length. The great tzimtzum. Tzimtzum literally means contraction or concealment. The Arizal, or Isaac Luria, uses this to deal with a fundamental theological problem. And that problem is how to reconcile higher truths with the truths of this, or you could say the untruths of this world. If there is indeed a divine force that imbues existence with, sustains existence and imbues existence with energy, energizes life, then how is it possible that we can defy that force? It seems like a contradiction. The thing that's giving you life, you are denying or defying. We do live in an agnostic universe. Even those that are believers, it's not like they see God every moment or even live by God. They believe in it and try to live by it. But we live in a world that's dark, that does not see. That's why life is so complicated. How many of us know when we ask the big questions, why am I here? Do I have a mission? Do I have a purpose in my life? How should I know? How should I choose? What does the future hold? These are all we're all shrouded in darkness. You come into this world literally in a dark world. It may be light, it may be shining physically, but it's dark. It's dark in the philosophical sense. So his big dilemma is how is it possible that a God would create a universe that is completely clueless? Another way of putting the phrase in the question is this: if all of us are really part of one symbiotic reality, one mosaic. So look at nature. Take the human being out of the equation. What's nature? Nature is perfect. What do I mean by perfect? There's a balance in nature. Even the predators and prey are part of the balance. If the predators did not kill the prey would multiply and destroy the world. That's why you find a fascinating thing that the predators, the prey that are eaten and consumed most by higher species are the ones that multiply most. There are far more vegetables and minerals on this earth than animals. There are far more small animal insects than there are large animals. So there's a balance to the universe, and this balance is continuously maintained. Even earthquakes and volcanoes and hurricanes and so on are part of the balance. It's the human beings that can upset this balance. So the question is this: if we are all part of one large organism, and nature definitely testifies to this, as I said, symbiosis, this synchronicity, how is it possible that one human being can hurt another? So of course there's the conventional answer called free will. But even that, free will, fine, but how? In a healthy body, is it possible that one part of the organ, one limb should attack another limb? Autoimmune diseases and illnesses will cause that to happen. But in a healthy body, in this small 5-6 foot frame, there's a fascinating balance that is almost impossible to even fathom. So the question is, how is it possible we can hurt each other if we're all part of one large organism? So all these questions in one fell swoop, the Arizal answers with its symptom. That there's a fundamental concealment and darkness that does not allow us to see the connection we have. So all war, all injustice, all jealousy, all pain perpetrated by man against man is all a result of a darkness, an absence of light where we do not see we're connected. If we knew that when you hurt someone else, you're hurting yourself, who would do that? Would any healthy person put their hand in fire? But if you don't know it's fire, or you don't know the damage that fire causes, you do it all the time. So basically, human consciousness is shrouded in darkness, is shrouded in a distortion. You can even call it a grand deception. What's even more fascinating, he blames his deception on God. Let's say blames, it's not blamed, it's quite deliberate. That God intentionally deceived us into creating an agnostic world in us thinking that we're disconnected from each other and from God. Now I know the implications of this type of theological statement are pretty huge, but that's the statement. And not just a statement, it's elaborated upon at length in literally hundreds of volumes. Because if this is true, and I only say it if because I totally believe it is, then essentially defines our whole state of consciousness, who we are. It defines why we find life so difficult. Because we live in a dark world. And when I say dark, I don't care how much knowledge a person may have and how much. When I say dark, we do not know what our souls are like. We don't even know what's good for us. Can anyone state and make a list of what's exactly good and healthy for you to do today or tomorrow? You could say, I think these things are good for me. I don't know. That's what they told me it's good for me. Now there's some things we know are absolutely destructive. And there are probably other things we know that are absolutely good. But there's so many other things. Like I said, areas of the most important areas of search for truth, for love, for soul, for God, faith. These are all areas that are shrouded in mystery, and you see people keep debating them. If it was so clear, there wouldn't be any debates. You know, you have people who are passionate believers and passionate non-believers, radical atheists and radical believers. And everyone thinks they're right. So that alone tells you that nobody really knows what's going on. Because if it was very clear, it should just be obvious, you know. The thinkers of the Enlightenment 200 years ago said by the year 2000 there would be no religion left. And not only is there religion, how many 4 billion people on this earth identify 2.5 billion with Christianity and 1.5 billion with Muslim, which is the largest growing religion. It only grows, doesn't just grow, it's terrorizing the world in some ways. I mean, the list goes on. God and religion have not gone away as some enlightened thinkers thought it would. So bottom line is, we live in a world there's a lot of uncertainty. And this uncertainty, the Arizal identifies, relates directly to this big tzimtzum. This big tzimtzum, the lamp of darkness. And more importantly, there's a purpose in it. Because that's what makes life meaningful. Had God created a world where everything was clear, so then who needs us? Then we're just a bunch of puppets playing out a script. This darkness is very intentional. And one of the analogies they give for it is an analogy of a parent who hides from a child to elicit the ingenuity of the child to find the parent. So the whole point of the darkness is in order for us to not be deceived by it. It's like a test in a way. It's like a challenge. Now, if the child is wise, the child will continue to search. But what happens if the parents hid themselves very well? Then the child stops looking. And that's where all the problems begin. So basically, evil, or any type of pain that we inflict on one another, is a result of a misunderstanding of the concealment that we're faced with. The concealment is meant to really bring you a greater revelation. It's like I mentioned before, the pressure that's meant to bring out excellence, and you think the pressure is meant to hurt you, or you just see it as a nuisance. But in truth, that's the key to life. Look how life works. We begin our lives 9 months in our mother's womb, completely protected. You don't have to do anything. You don't even have to use your lungs. Fed, nurtured, everything is taken care of. Then the umbilical cord is cut, child emerges in this world, still quite dependent, but now at least a separate entity. And this process of growth begins. And all of us were there, believe it or not. I know it's hard to imagine, but that's how we were. And then we grow and we discover our fingers and our toes. And then we start to discover that we are, over the years start rolling. We're an independent entity. Until the point where you could actually go to war with a person that fed you for 9 months and nurtured you for whatever reason. So that's how independent we become. But independence comes with a price. The first time a child goes to school, the child cries. Sometimes the second time too. The first time you try to walk, you fall. And you grow older the first time you leave home, summer camp, school. And then you go out and finally leave your parents' home and you build your own life. Every one of these steps is another step of individuality, independence, but it always comes with a price. The price is the pain of leaving a comfort zone, leaving a protection zone. And I'm assuming, let's say, growing up in a beautiful home, a nurtured home. Even there, it's not healthy for a child to continue living at home. At some point, you have to move. At some point, you have to find your own life and build your own life. Why wouldn't we just say, let me be protected and nurtured and supported by my parents? Well, even if your parents could support you, it's not necessarily healthy for your psyche. Because as the Talmud says, a person has much more pleasure and desire in $1 they earn on their own than 9 that they're given as a gift. A gift is considered to be bread of shame. Because a human being, deep down, all of us, not so deep down, know that you have to be productive. And to be productive, you have to be challenged. Why not just choose comfort zones? Now, frankly, many people do. But I think it's pretty obvious, at least cognitively, academically, theoretically, pretty clear that without a challenge, you do not excel. If you're completely protected, as I mentioned earlier, and completely not necessary, and you're not challenged to produce on your own, and to become a producer, most of your potential will remain locked, and you'll never become who you should become. Why is it this way? Because that's the only way life can be meaningful. Simple as that. And it all goes back to that tzimtzum. The darkness is necessary in order for you to be able to bring light into it. That's why it's there. So they're very deliberate. I can elaborate at length about this. I just want to go to a little more psychological side of it with the darkness and the light. So, number one is the purpose is to go into a dark world and bring light into it. And to know that you have more light than you have darkness. Even though the initial status quo state of the universe is dark, the initial status quo of all of us. We don't begin with knowledge. We don't begin educated. We don't begin having experience. All those things come in life. You're not born with it. You're born with the brains. You're born with the tools, but you have not refined and honed the tools yet. All knowledge has to be acquired. But here's the interesting thing. The Talmud says that when you're in your mother's womb, you were taught the entire Torah. You were embedded, let's put it this way, downloaded the entire code of everything you'll need to know in life. And then upon birth, we're made to forget. The tzimtzum again. So inside of you, you have everything you need to know. That's why there's a concept called resonance. You know, the resonance. Why do things resonate? What does resonate mean? Resonate means, I haven't necessarily heard it, but something rings true about it. Today we know, for example, music and song. We know today, it's been documented and witnessed, that when you play music, even newborn children, and even children in their mother's womb react to music. They move to the music. Which is pretty extraordinary. Because how do they know music? They were never heard it before. Language is even also pretty miraculous that by 2-3 years old, children are speaking. But there you can say, okay, they have some element of sense of language within them, the concept of language. And then when they hear their parents and adults speak, they start mimicking, and therefore they learn. But it's just also pretty amazing that in just 2-3 years you could have a child talking, and so on. But music, they haven't heard anyone play a song. How does a child in the mother's womb know? So the Kabbalists answer very simply. They know because music is the natural language of the soul, even before it comes to this earth. It's only that we forget. So when you hear a song, it's just reminding you of something that you've always known. That's called resonance. So we have plenty of resources within us, however they are concealed. The concealment is only a superficial concealment. But because we can take it so seriously, and if we give it too much credence, we give it more substance than it really has, like I said earlier with the psychological warfare. We start thinking it's more powerful than it really is. This is one of the biggest innovations of the great master called Arizal, and when he discusses what he calls the doctrine, what they call the secret of the tzimtzum, sometimes it's called the secret of the tzimtzum. I've written about this extensively. If any of you want more information on this, it's a very, obviously, a comprehensive subject, but it answers and addresses so many elements of existence, including our senses, our sense of existential loneliness, our sense of disconnection, and at the same time belonging. And the challenge is, and this is the purpose, is for us to reconnect. Let there be light. That's the command. Not just God says, let there, you and I are commanded, and we can command, let there be light. You have the power to bring light. When you light a menorah on Hanukkah, you have the power to pierce darkness. That's the bottom line. Darkness is an enemy as long as you let it be an enemy. You have the power to pierce it and to transform it. So to take this to another level, so okay, fine. Which really essentially means that what's the stronger force inside of you is your light more than your darkness. Well, some people will say, 1 second, most of my day I'm consumed with all my fears. What's more powerful are my fears than my confidence? Well, that is true for many people. That doesn't mean necessarily it's true, it just means that you feel it's true. From the Torah's point of view, the exact opposite is true. You're far more light than you are dark. But darkness has the power to convince you to think otherwise. So, a critical element to all of this is knowing and having absolute confidence. You know, when you're, let's say, a soldier in an army, a soldier in the military, you're fighting a battle, you're just an infantryman, you know, a basic soldier. And you're told by your commander, by your superior, coming straight from the commander-in-chief, we're going to march forward and we're going to fight this battle. So obviously in your heart you may say, I don't know, how do I know we can win? The enemy looks pretty powerful to me. And there's always the risks. And how does he know, the commander-in-chief, that we're definitely going to win? But the part of training in the military is just accepting blind faith. This is what your superior said. There's no questioning it. Because there's no time to question. And if you start questioning and challenging your own confidence and your own willpower, that becomes the enemy. So there's times where you have to simply accept that this is the way it is. And I say, 1 second, what happened with our minds? Yeah, there's a time for mind. That's the time when you ask questions. But then there's a time when for war, there's no time to ask questions. Because one small hesitation is life and death. So I'm not suggesting someone should jump in, don't go into war. You have to be trained first. But there comes a point that's called commitment. You know, I know a fellow who's dating this woman. They're dating now for 3-4 years already. They basically can't. There's nothing more they can learn about each other. At least, the rest is going to come in life. But they both are terrified of making the move of committing and marrying. And we talk to them, very normal people, and they of course they bring up the biggest question: how do we know? How could you know for sure? So I said, so tell me, so what are you going to do? You'll never know for sure. How are you going to know 100%? What do you want God to come to you and tell you that for sure? You have to take your intelligence. You love each other. You're with each other. So there comes a point where you simply have to make a leap. I wouldn't say that to you day one, but after a certain amount of time, there comes, yes, you have to take a leap. And they don't want to take a leap. I said, that's how it works. You have to take a leap. Yes, there's an unknown. There's some risk. But it's calculated risk. It's not just wild risk. That's what trust is about. You have to trust. So there comes a point in life where you do your due diligence, you do your research, you go through all the motions, you do the testing and all the mishigasin that we all do to each other, and then at some point it comes a time, okay, now you're a mature adult, you're in or you're not in. No one likes that type of ultimatum. I understand, it's terrifying. But that's where the difference between the men and the boys, as they say, or the girls and the women. I don't know if they use that expression, but and that's why I use the story with the example with the military. There comes a point where you cannot be starting to question, this is what we're doing and this is what we're in. And you tell me how much confidence is important in any type of battle. Confidence not only battles, in business and other decisions. Confidence is a major factor in the element. Now obviously, empty confidence in something that's completely ridiculous, I'm not discussing. Even that sometimes works. Like I told you with the chess player. Sometimes just by projecting confidence, you can win. But we're talking about also a combination of a certain amount of intelligent research, and then comes the element the confidence is I would say the most important aspect, even more than the actual research, in really making a move. Because a move requires courage, and it requires vigilance. Because you have to stick with it. And there are going to be challenges. And then suddenly something happens, a setback, you say, I was wrong, I shouldn't have done it. No, that's not true. Don't start trying to go back to that. Fight for it. Figure out a way how to fight for it. This is where you see people who really excel, that's what they do. They fight for it. Now, obviously, there are times you have to know when to fold. But that requires objective opinion. When it's clear, even then sometimes you shouldn't fold. But I'm not going to suggest and say it's impossible. There's some things that won't work. But to begin with an attitude that like some people say, everyone's guilty until proven innocent, that's definitely not coming from a very secure place. So it comes to a point where you have to make that commitment. The Jewish people are here today lighting Hanukkah menorahs not because they second guess themselves. They believed and they forged ahead. I've spoken once to a pretty radical atheist, and he would admit, he said to me, I can't say I believe in God, because I don't. But I could definitely say that the Jews did believe, and because they believe, they're here today. You can't deny that. Because there's no way you survive everything we've gone through if you don't have some type of belief. It's just impossible. It wasn't logical calculations. We didn't have any logical calculations during the Holocaust. What exactly we had, we were completely vulnerable. And we had no logical calculations under the Tsar, and the pogroms, and the Inquisitions, and the Crusades, and so on and so forth. There were forces at work that we had no control over, but they could not control our faith. Pharaoh, the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, every great empire, the Romans, are all gone. With far greater numbers, far greater wealth, far greater empires. What was the difference? They had no faith. They did not believe in a destiny. They believed in themselves. And then when the self fell, they had nothing left. For the Jewish people, there was always a belief in something greater than themselves, called God. Everyone bowed to Haman. Mordechai would not bow. I don't bow to human beings. And this is what infuriated people. People wanted, worship me. Why are you worshiping an invisible God? What it was about invisible God? It was basically saying we don't worship man-made things, men or man-made things. That's the point. We worship eternity. That's what we worship. And that's what you connect to, and then you become eternal, because that's what you connect to. That's why even it may sound irrational, I'll call it super rational. That's the commitment. And this is true across the board. You don't even need the word religion. Tell me exactly what drove the Wright brothers to go figure out how to fly. You have to be crazy. Someone will come to you and say, I want $100 investment. I'm going to build a flying ship. what would you do? It was 150 years ago. You'd throw them out of your office. I'm sure a crackpot. Fly. Birds fly. Humans don't fly in a flying ship. Every time a plane takes off, I think about it. Whether it's the Wright brothers, whoever gets the credit for it. It was complete mishigas. It was a irrational obsession to try to fly like a bird. And they built a whole industry now. There's airplanes taking off and on, and it's a whole thing with frequent flyer miles and taking off your shoes and the whole business of flight today. It's a nuisance as well. And now they're debating whether there should be cell phones on the planes. They built an entire industry out of what? A few people were just. There was this doctor coming to this class a number of years ago. He's a researcher, medical research. He chose a few illnesses that are not pretty known. He's going to conquer them. He's convinced he's going to eradicate these illnesses, these diseases. And he calls himself an atheist. That's what he tells me, at least. So I said to him, how are you so sure you're going to eradicate these diseases? Maybe some diseases can't be eradicated. He says, no, absolutely. Everything can be done. Everything, every disease can be eradicated. And I start challenging him. This was, of course, setting him up. And I said, something? You're a much more radical believer than most religious people I know. You just believe in this completely irrationally. How do you know? Maybe some illnesses can be. He says, no, everything can be conquered. So I said, how do you know? He says, that's the miracle of medicine. So I said, so if you replace the word medicine with God, you're a believer. You just call it medicine. Nature. You call it miracle of nature. I was flying to the West Coast a number of months ago. I was watching this History Channel on JetBlue. They were a show of how the world was 30 billion years ago and how it came from 30 billion years to an hour, 30 billion years in an hour. And I was blown away. It was an amazing show, I must say. But they keep using the word the miracle. At least 50, 60 absolute random coincidences were necessary for us to be here today. And they keep saying the miracle of nature, the miracle of nature. I don't mind. They don't want to use the word God. It's fine with me. It doesn't bother me. But it's like, what do you mean the miracle of nature? Like, why did this random accident happen? There's no reason why. It was the best case. That hour was the best case for God I ever saw. Because how many different things had to happen for us to be who we are today. The only place where they don't take out the word God is by the way, is insurance policies. There you have acts of God. So I asked an insurer, I said, why do there's the separation of church and state. Why are you using the word God in secular insurance policies? Why don't you say by act of nature? So he told me something interesting. He said, if we say nature, they can still sue us, because who says maybe they shouldn't be liable, the insuree, but the insurer should be liable because nature is maybe your responsibility. Act of God, we always can blame it on God. So I see when it comes to financial liability, suddenly God is a good scapegoat. Seriously. So act of nature, you could argue, why am I responsible? You should be responsible if it's nature, if it's an act of God. But look at all your insurance policies. Anyway, that's as a side. That's not the point I want to make. The point I do want to make is that the challenges in our lives are deliberately there for us to. It's a vote of confidence in us, because that means that you have the light to fight, to overcome this darkness. But there's something even deeper, and that's called the light within the dark. So besides the fact that the darkness itself purpose is light, the truth is darkness is light. And the black hole is the best example. You see a black hole, you can't see it. You know it's a black hole. Everything about it is dark. And then you find out it's dark, you know why? Because it's so powerful light. The light is so powerful it doesn't let you see itself. In psychology, in our psyches, we absolutely have the same thing. When you see power in any situation, even in the darkest situation, you know there's power. I was speaking to a group of, I see this particularly, I don't deal with it extensively, but I have dealt with it somewhat. People who have addictive personalities. What I mean by that is not that others are addicted to them, it means that they get addicted to things. And you'll always find people who are, the worst addicts are the ones that are the most creative and the most passionate people. But you usually don't think of it that way. You meet an addict, you don't see them as a passionate soul. You see them as an addict, as a unfortunate, misfortunate, unfortunate person dependent on something that's controlling their lives. But someone who's mediocre, their addictions are also going to be mediocre. When someone is extremely passionate, think of it like an example. You're walking in the desert, you're extremely thirsty. And every moment that passes, the thirst builds. Okay? Who's going to drink the water with more passion than the person who's extremely thirsty? Someone else who's not thirsty, who has water or who has other sustenance, is not that passionate about it. Passion is always can always lead, when misguided, to the worst possible things. Another example, fire. Is fire good or bad? So we know we can't exist without fire. We could not exist without warmth in this world. If the sun were just a few hundred miles more distant from Earth, we would freeze to death. So we need warmth. But fire that's uncontrolled and unbridled, unchanneled, what will happen? It consumes, it destroys. Everything in life is that way. Wherever there's a lot of power, it can go in both directions. So when you see something where you see this black hole, initially you can say, nothing's there. No. The most powerful thing is in that darkness. It's so powerful it doesn't let any light get out. The people who've been hurt most in life are the ones who put up the most claws. They have the strongest armor. Who has the greatest defense mechanisms in the human being? The ones that were hurt most. Because they need those mechanisms to protect themselves. They say the porcupine, which is the sharpest needles, has the softest underbelly. I never tested it, but that's what they say. Next time you check out a porcupine, they're not going to let you test it. That's the whole point. The needles are meant to protect. So they used to say about Israelis, but they still say it, that Israelis are like the sabra. Sabra. Sabra is a euphemism for someone born in Israel. But a sabra is also a fruit, an Israeli fruit. It's a fruit with a very prickly fruit. It's called prickly fruit. It has very sharp, very thin and sharp needles. Today you usually don't get them. They already strip them from all those needles. But a real sabra has very sharp needles. So they say sharp on the outside, but sweet and soft on the inside. That's what they say about Israelis. So abrasive on the outside, but very gentle on the inside. Which in many ways is true. You go to Israel, you should always know that in Israel, here the customer is always right. In Israel, the customer is always wrong. If you realize that, you'll be all right when you travel there. And secondly, like you see on the road, you'll see how they yell at each other. You think that they hate each other. But like I was driving with one Israeli cab, I said to him, "Why do you have to drive right on the back tailgate behind the guy right in front of you?" The classic Israeli answer is, because if I don't, someone else will get in between us. So what? Okay, but that's the logic. So there's two sides. There's Middle Eastern personality types. The point I'm saying here is that in anything that you see is very dark, rest assured there's a lot of light in there. The problem is it's trapped. It's trapped. And that's why so many children who are misunderstood and just causes more problems. Those that understand a child, a rebellious child, will realize that there's a reason. No one just rebels for no reason. Especially if someone's really acting up, there's a very good reason. That doesn't mean it's an excuse to be undisciplined, but a wise person looks for the reason. They don't just look at the outer dimension. I have a friend that I studied with at the time in Brussels, Skype. He went to private schools in Europe. He told me about a guy. I forgot his name. Wish I could come up with it. You could find it online. Anyway, it's an interesting story. This guy, he says, in the private schools, everyone knew these kids in the private schools, the top schools in Europe. And they were in Paris, and one day they know there was a kid who was known to be delinquent, coming from a very, very affluent family, but he was a real troublemaker, and he was thrown out from one school to the next school, as much as his parents had the money, but the schools just threw him out. He was coming out to this Paris private school, and all the kids were anticipating this guy coming, because everyone knew he's the biggest troublemaker around, so they were waiting for some, action. Okay, the guy appears, seems like a mild-mannered person, a kid, I don't know, I forgot the age, 11, 12 maybe. And they're sitting in class, the first day in class, so this fellow tells me, my friend tells me, so we're sitting and waiting to see, no trouble. He's quiet. Class is almost over. Right, a minute before the bell rings, he raises his hand. He says to the teacher, he says, I've sat very quietly and listened to you. It's my first class here, and I have to tell you, you're a terrible teacher. Very calmly, professor tells him, you're a terrible teacher. But I have some good news for you. Without any charge, for no charge at all, if you come to my house tonight, I'll teach you how to be a better teacher. This is an 11-year-old kid telling the teacher. So you can imagine he was expelled right on the spot. And that was that. And he never heard from him again. So my friend says, just last year, 2 years ago, he decided he's got to look up where this guy is. He's either in prison, we're talking now 30 years later. He's either a criminal somewhere or the guy is like changing the world in some way. Anyway, he looks it up. He looks up his name. His name is like a Greek name. I forgot the name. And lo and behold, what is he doing? He's the head of strategic initiatives at New York Library, right across the street here. Okay, and not strategic, some strategic, something like that. And then I read his bio. His bio says he's a man that thinks out of the box, is always challenging the status quo. It doesn't say about his story, but here's an 11-year-old kid that you would think, just a troublemaker. Now, thank God, I guess somebody understood his strengths. He could have become big trouble. Could have been also probably gotten himself into deep trouble. But you never know when you see something where it's coming from, and it's always critical to understand. If nothing else, what Arizal teaches is that when you see something on the outside, like you see a black hole, never be deceived by what you see. You can see someone who seems to be unpleasant, bitter, angry, and what you may discover is that this person is a beautiful soul that was very hurt. And they found no other way to express it but through that way. Again, it's not an excuse. I'm not trying to find excuses. We're talking about how to help somebody. In relationships, this is very much the case. There was a couple that I met. They were married, not for a long time, and they could not consummate the marriage. The woman did not let the guy close to her. So they started speaking to family and to therapists and this, and it became pretty apparent. Maybe it's just it's not working. The chemistry is not there. We're not there for each other. Someone knew me, and they suggested they should come see me. So they came to see me, a young couple in their early 30s, late 20s. And I'm speaking to both of them. And then I asked to speak to the woman privately, to the wife. And they both told the story the same way. No one was pointing fingers. It wasn't like a thing. They thought maybe just not meant to be, and that's it. As I speak to her, I saw right away in her body language a few other things that she must have been hurt sexually, violated in some way. I didn't know how, what. And I didn't want to, obviously, intrude on her boundaries, so I just broached it subtly. I asked her, why would you find your husband not handsome, not attractive, not desirable? No, I think he's a great guy. They dated for a long time. They chose each other. It wasn't like they just met. So I was broaching different things, and I saw she was refusing to talk about it. Then finally, I said something like, you may split apart, you may find out there's nothing to do with him, you may have a problem with any man. So I see it would be worth to discover that now instead of later, because you may be making a big mistake. So she started saying, so what do you suggest? And I say, look, if in any way you've been hurt, it could very well be. It's a normal reaction that when someone's been hurt, just like someone punches you, once, twice, 3 times, the fifth time someone tries to put your hand, even if they're not punching you, you do that. That's the nature of a person. So then she broke down and started sharing a bit. It wasn't so important for me to hear, but literally I can tell you that their marriage was saved because she acknowledged it. She told no one, and she was. A few years earlier, she was basically attacked by a guy, and obviously she didn't even know her body was just reacting. This is not uncommon. I'm just giving a case study because I actually dealt with it directly. And what was good news was that ultimately, the husband's a really good guy. I explained to him that, this is an opportunity to build a real relationship. Most people don't have this challenge. But this challenge can end up creating a deeper intimacy because you'll communicate with each other. You have to be sensitive to each other, extra sensitive. And I guided him a bit. And it ended up being unbelievable. It's like a couple I would send anybody to go talk to. They really know how to love each other because they don't take anything for granted. It's not like, there's nothing automatic about it. They really took darkness and they turned it into light. And this can be done anytime. Every one of us can do it. Unfortunately, most of us don't see it through. We either are deceived by the negative and think, okay, this is just not, or we misunderstand it, or we don't feel we have the courage or the confidence to forge ahead. And again, I'm not suggesting every situation has to be taken with bull by the horns. Some situations one has to withdraw. That's why you need objective advice. But I would say most mistakes we make is because we think we're deceived by the situation and we don't realize there's light inside the dark. A lot of light. And then you have to figure out how to free the light. which obviously is not the scope of our conversation here because every case is different. There's no two situations alike. But if you could just think about it that way, and don't give up just because something seems impossible, seems difficult, to realize there is light everywhere. Because the darkness was placed there intentionally in order to conceal, in order for you to penetrate it, to pierce it. And especially in the area of emotional confusion and emotional relationships, this message is vital. Because we live in a world where also we become accustomed to getting everything easy. Fast food generation. You press a button, I got it. All that is good. All technologies in the world are not going to help us in our relationships. I'd like anyone to show me a statistic that relationships are better because we have texting and we have mobile phones. As a matter of fact, probably the argument can be made the other way around. That technology is not exactly a great tool for personal communications and conversations. But let's say it doesn't make things worse, but better for sure not. Well, what does it have to do with nurturing? How could a child being nurtured by a parent be helped by technology? Where the mother can talk to the child via video? God forbid, I'm terrified of the day someone's going to tell me they're going to find a virtual mother. Then you buy a computer that cuddles the child and you don't need a mother there. I hope that never happens. There's some things that are not replaceable by human touch, by human love. Things like truth, soul, love, God, anything of that nature, warmth. These are things that technology make absolutely no difference. Either you have it or you don't have it. If you have it, then the technology can support it and help it. If you don't have it, technology will not replace that. And sometimes it's important to focus on that today because we think getting all these comforts and having better communication, better machines, means that we become better emotional creatures. It's not true. One thing has nothing to do with the other. And the way it creates a further distortion. So the bottom line that I'd like to say is that Hanukkah's lesson is that there's deep light in the dark. The black hole that is today part of physics is psychologically even more true. That in the darkest things and the things that seem sometimes the most foreboding, you have the most power of all. And it's about knowing how to channel it, knowing how to redeem it, free it. And it's a big concept in Hasidic discourses. They talk about how you transform darkness into light. And when you do that, the light is even stronger. The light that comes from darkness is stronger than the light that comes from light. Which makes total sense. The light in the black hole is more powerful than the light elsewhere. Except the gravitational pull doesn't let it go. It's like any resistance. You build a dam, so the resistance builds. Where's there more pressure? Where there's a dam or where there's no dam? Always where there's a dam. Where there's resistance, there's always going to be more intensity. So it's a lesson that we can be applied in so many different ways in our personal lives. And being that this is the last night of Hanukkah, it's I think an excellent opportunity to use the energy of this Hanukkah. The flames are still burning here, and hopefully forever. So even though Hanukkah ends tonight, but the flames continue to burn, physically, metaphorically. And since each of us is like a flame, a soul, as I said, is like a flame of God. All souls, those souls that are with us here in this earth, great. And even the souls like your grandmother. So the soul lives on. It just doesn't have the particular body that you were familiar with. But a soul lives on into eternity. And souls empower each other. Our job here is to be the channels of souls of our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents, like I said earlier, standing on the shoulders of giants, to be souls that illuminate this dark world. And it comes down to the simple equation: you're either part of the problem or you're part of the solution. You're either part of the population of darkness or the population of light. It's one or the other. You're either bringing light into the world or you're being participant in intensifying this darkness. And that's a decision each of us can make. We can either be influenced or we will influence. As I always say, there are the three types of people: people who make things happen, people who watch things happen, and people who ask what happened. So we're talking, of course, about making things happen. So I hope this Hanukkah empowers us all with that type of power. I hope some of the words that I shared here empower you as well. I hope they empower me as well. And please see us, myself, my Velvel Meaningful Life Center, as a resource, a light resource of helping to ignite and to transform matter into energy. Einstein at the end of the day said E equals mc c squared. That all matter is really energy, except you don't see it. All matter is energy, and just like the black hole, it's concealed. It's waiting for us to free the energy. In Kabbalistic terms, it means each of us is allocated with a certain amount of divine sparks that are embedded in our life experiences, in the work we do, in the talents we have, the people we know, the places we go to. And it's our role, wherever we are, wherever we go, even the seemingly random places, is to free the energy, free the sparks, the spiritual opportunities in each situation. Very much like a businessman is always looking for opportunities, we're always looking for spiritual opportunities. So it's an honor to spend time with kindred flames, and I hope your flame dominates and not your wick, and the soul guides your body where to go instead of the other way around. So everyone have a happy Hanukkah and a very illuminating week, illuminating year. Philip will be giving his class tomorrow night. We have, we have to of course mention that there, even in the jelly donuts and that are over there, there are also sparks. They're very deeply embedded, but as we said, wherever there's a lot of power, there's power. So, and please enjoy Hanukkah, and we should only celebrate together, only hear good news from Simchas, from you too. And until next week, everyone have a very pleasant and illuminating week. Thank you very much.
Especially to take a donut, take maybe one for your family. There's enough donuts here for everybody.